Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Helen Hall and I'm the Chief Executive of the Policing Authority. Just some announcements before the meeting commences. Just take note of the emergency exits. There's one exit at the back of the hall and one through the doors that you entered. And in the event of an emergency, please leave a building by your nearest exit. If you do require help, there are members of the Policing Authority staff around the room, and just ask them. Just to be aware, as usual, this will be streamed live on the internet and a video recording will be made. It's just good to be aware of that you may be captured as part of the record. And I'd like if everyone could just check and make sure their mobile phone is switched off so it doesn't interfere with the live stream. Just a point of order, silence as usual must be observed at all times, and if you need to leave the room, just try and do it really quietly without disturbing the meeting. And as you know from the meeting information on our website, this is a meeting between the authority and the Garda Commissioner, which you're present to observe. There's therefore no opportunity for anyone else to participate in the meeting. And if you leave at any stage during the meeting, please do so through the door at the back of the hall. Thank you very much. Chairperson.
Thank you, Helen. Good afternoon, everybody. Excuse me. I wanted to make some opening remarks because this meeting in public of the Policing Authority with the Garda Commissioner and her senior team takes place at a time of very considerable public controversy in relation to the Garda Síochána and the Garda Commissioner personally. This meeting also takes place in the context of the establishment of a tribunal of inquiry under Mr. Justice Peter Charlton to investigate a range of matters, including allegations of wrongdoing contained in certain protected disclosures. That being the case, it is appropriate at the start of this meeting that I reflect on the remit of the authority for the information of the public and of the audience here. The Policing Authority, as part of a complex architecture of Garda oversight, has a quite specific and carefully delineated role given to it by the Oireachtas. Whatever about the role we ought to have, and indeed the authority itself may have views on that question in due course, we have the role and remit given to us, no more and no less. The overarching remit is to oversee the performance by the Garda Síochána of its policing functions, and a range of specific functions and tasks are given to us in that regard. This remit relates to the Garda Síochána organisation, including its systems, processes, effectiveness, achievement of targets, etc. If you like, it relates to the performance of the body corporate, to use business language. Individual accountability is an entirely different matter in the statute. The personal accountability of Garda members is to their superiors, the Garda Commissioner or GSOC, depending on the circumstances. And the Garda Commissioner's accountability is to the Minister and the Government for the performance of the Commissioner's functions. It's a clear statutory distinction of which the authority has to be mindful at all times, but particularly in the current context, where the Government has decided to set up a tribunal of inquiry to investigate certain matters, including allegations relating both to the current and former Garda Commissioners personally. We are mindful that there are a range of questions which the authority might like to ask, and no doubt questions which the public would like to see asked and would like answers to. However, as a matter of course, we are not in a position to discuss in public the specifics of any open investigation, whether criminal or internal, or any civil litigation. This is also the case in relation to matters which are the subject of a tribunal of inquiry. Both authority members and Garda representatives present are aware that care needs to be taken in our questions and answers, and this includes not to comment on or to criticise a person outside this meeting or to encroach on the work of the tribunal. That being said, it is within our remit to discuss relevant processes and system issues, to discuss how current matters are impacting on Garda performance and on public confidence in policing. We already commenced our discussion last week when the authority had 2 additional meetings, including one with the Garda Commissioner at her request. We have arranged our agenda today with our remit in mind. We will begin with some questions on public confidence and performance, and then move on to discussing the Garda Code of Ethics. Our published agenda, you will see an item in relation to the Commissioner's monthly report to the authority, and we've already disposed of that agenda item in our private meeting to allow as much time as possible for questions relating to performance and public confidence. Commissioner, with those opening remarks, rather than making an opening statement, can I ask you how you will assure the authority, and by extension the community, that Garda performance is not suffering because of the impacts of public controversy and of engaging and appearing before the tribunal? Can you assure us about the targets in the policing plan and that the foot won't come off the accelerator, so to speak, on organisation change? And can I ask you to be as specific as possible, please? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I think it's a well-known fact and a reality to say that over the last 3 years, Garda Síochána has been dealing with significant controversies and crises, quite a considerable number of legacy issues, and through that, a number of issues. Despite that, and despite not having the senior team to full capacity, I think we have achieved, and I think the evidence speaks for itself of what we have achieved, both in terms of operational successes, but also being in a position to actually launch and indeed start implementation of the biggest reform programme in the 94-year history of Garda Síochána. So our intention, the reform has started, the reform is being implemented, everything from the culture of the organisation, which I know the authority members and I'm sure the public appreciate, doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of time, a lot of energy and a lot of resilience to challenge attitudes and behaviours that will change the culture of an organisation and renew us into a modern 21st century policing service. And I know that with the ongoing support of the authority and indeed the Garda Inspectorate, that work will continue. But I think, as I say, the evidence speaks for itself. Thankfully, as of now, we do have the executive team in place. With the support of the authority, we have the competitions ongoing to fill the capacity required in both the Assistant Commissioner level but also Executive Director level, which gives us the capacity to actually make sure that we maintain the implementation of the reform programme that we have underway, which I know the authority appreciate is not insignificant. And also in terms of the operational successes. In the last 3 years, despite all of the challenges that we have faced, we haven't allowed that to take away from, as you put it, Chair, having our targets in place, but also having our strategies in place to deal with crime. What that has resulted in is a 30% reduction in overall property crime, but very significant inroads made in relation to organised crime activity and also in terms of dissident activity. So our commitment as a team here is to make sure that we maintain that focus. I think focus is something that's very, very important. We have to deal, these are very significant issues that have arisen. We have to deal with them. We very much welcome the fact that we will be able to deal with these issues in a public forum. That is something that I think is an expectation not alone of the government but also of the public. And I think we welcome the fact that we are going to deal with these matters in a public forum. As well as dealing with these matters, what we will do is put in place a team to assist us in dealing with the processes around the tribunal and servicing the requirements of the tribunal of inquiry. And that is not insignificant, so we will need to put our teams, and we have indeed put our teams in place there. Meanwhile, our focus is making sure that we support, we guide, and most importantly, we lead the men and women of Garda Síochána in continuing to deliver the operational successes, continuing our focus on protecting the community and preserving a safe society, and making sure that we continue our focus on the implementation of our reform programme.
Thank you. And our first questions will be on public confidence area, generally speaking, from Dr. Conway.
Commissioner, are you concerned about the impact of recent controversies on public confidence, on the morale of members and staff, on other agencies and bodies that work with Garda Síochána?
There's no doubt about it that, you know, and I was very taken with some recent commentary recently in the public, not about Garda Síochána, but about society in general, about the overture of negative sentiment and about what negative sentiment has impacts on confidence in the institutions of the state and indeed different strands of society. That is something that as police professionals we have to live with every single day. Am I concerned about any impact on confidence? Of course I am. What are we doing about that is we're making sure, firstly, from a public perspective, as I've said earlier, that we continue to maintain our focus on protecting our communities, making sure that we continue our focus on engaging with our communities. In terms of our own personnel, there is no doubt about it. If somebody wakes up every day and they're reading negativity in the newspapers about an organisation which they are absolutely committed, and it's not just the newspapers, it's public commentary, but, you know, we have men and women right throughout the organisation, Garda, civilian and reserve members, who go out every day to do the very best that they can do and to do the job that we all signed up on Garda Síochána to do, to protect the community and to make sure that we tackle crime in all its forms. And of course it has an impact. We're working very closely with our own people, with our staff associations, and also with different community groups to make sure that we minimise the impact of that. But I think there is no doubt about it. It's going to have to take some time to see what the impact on confidence is. But I think we have to just work really hard at making sure that we reassure people that the day job is continuing to be done and that we are there for people at their times of need.
Yeah, I mean, I take your point around negative sentiment, but I think we're actually quite lucky in Ireland in that people have always been exceptionally willing to express confidence and trust in our Garda Síochána. And when we spoke at the launch of the Code of Ethics recently, we talked a lot, and you have talked a lot correctly about how trust is earned through interactions, but it's also earned through leadership and people seeing commitment to change and reform. So are there specific points you would like to mention, elements of things that you intend to do as the leader of the organisation to address the current issues surrounding trust?
Well, there are a lot of it because it's a very good point. And, you know, I'm on record as saying that trust is something that's very fragile, but it's earned one encounter at a time, each of us as individuals right throughout the organisation. And everybody's experience is going to make sure that that trust and confidence is maintained. We are very, very lucky, but we do not take it for granted that we enjoy very high levels of trust and support from the community. But the reality is that we have to make sure that we do exactly what you say, that we continue the reform and implementing the reforms that will actually make the service that we provide to the community much better. So everything from next week, we will launch our child, for child sexual abuse, our reporting line, but also the rollout of our protective services unit to make sure that the regional protective services unit, making sure that for our own people our stations are networked, making sure for our own people that we have the initiatives in place that are actually going to support them in doing the job that they have to do. And that work is continuing. We can talk about it in detail. Any of us here can talk about some of the initiatives in detail. But we have to make sure as well that we provide the reassurance to the community. And I think that strong, visible leadership, while we are going through very challenging times, that's an important aspect, and the commitment of the team here. We're meeting our own management team tomorrow, and some of you mentioned the Code of Ethics, the launch of the Code of Ethics. So even embedding the Code of Ethics, if I give a very specific example, you know, the Executive Director of HR and the Chief Administrative Officer, we've actually started a training programme that will start.
I think we're going to come back to have a more substantive discussion about the Code of Ethics in a little while. I suppose, I mean, I'm reminded that we had a public meeting in June, for instance, to discuss the aftermath of the O'Higgins report and the very many serious concerns that were raised in that report relating to the treatment of victims. And we have obviously you made numerous commitments at that meeting for reforms that were going to be implemented in order to remedy that situation. And we have been following through and performing our oversight role in relation to that at various committees. And while progress is being made on those, none of those have, as far as we know, been completed to the targets that were initially set out. We now see a range of additional issues emerging that some colleagues will discuss with you. And in that context, we have the reality that you and probably other members of the senior management team are going to be tied up significantly, as you've pointed out, at the tribunal for serious periods of time over the coming year, 2 years. How can you assure, or when you can take this opportunity to assure the public that they can have confidence in you to drive forward the very necessary reform programme that you have set out and that you have committed to?
Well, again, I can go back and John Toomey here on my right can talk about the very specific initiatives that we have and are continuing to implement from O'Higgins. And again, talking about the process issues. So, for example, the victim service offices are now up and running, as you are aware. I think one of the important cultural changes in respect to the victim service officers is actually having them staffed by a combination of both Garda and civilian members. And that's very important in terms of that shift in cultural change that we speak about. And yes, it's a fact that we are probably all going to, at different stages, be given evidence to the tribunal, but they will be specific periods of time. What's important is that we have the mechanisms in place, both the Garda and the civilian resources in place, to make sure that we keep the momentum up around the change programme that has been implemented. Everything from the Pulse Release 6.8, which is the tracking and recording of crime, which we committed to do as a result of O'Higgins, and John can talk in detail, and I know the authority members have had updates on that. And that's continuing at a pace. Also, the victims' offices, making sure that's there. And I know at our earlier private meeting, we spoke about particularly around the issues of domestic violence. But as well as that, I think the important point is our capacity and our ability to tackle the real issues that are harming communities. The real issues around, as well as taking care of our victims and putting victims at the heart of the Garda service, making sure that we're tackling organised crime, we're tackling people that would want to harm our communities, such as working closely with our colleagues in the Police Service of Northern Ireland, targeting the individuals that would carry out attacks such as were attempted yesterday in Northern Ireland, and making sure that we keep our focus there. And that is our commitment. We will do that. We're very good at compartmentalising dealing with different issues. Obviously, there are always court cases. There are always periods of time when we're required to do different things, and we can do that and at the same time keep the focus on maintaining what is the core business of Garda Síochána. Do you want to look at 6.8?
I think just following on from what the Commissioner said there about the implementation of the recommendations of the O'Higgins report, a lot of progress has been made and that work is continuing. It has also fed into a number of other areas about the implementation of a number of the recommendations from the various inspectors' report. And while progress has been made, the key recommendations that we expect to come in now in the next couple of weeks will include the provision of additional staff to the Garda Information Services Centre in Castlebar, which will really be an important part in our data quality and bringing in a quality review service over all of our incidents. So that's an important piece that hasn't been implemented at this stage because we have been waiting to get additional staff. There's a commitment now for that additional staff. We're expecting that to come along shortly. So while not all of the recommendations have been implemented, some of them have been down to staffing issues, which we now are in the processes of finalising. So certainly the issues that the Commissioner raises, the processes and around a lot of our operations has improved over the last couple of years, and it's that process that will help us as we move in to the rest of this year and beyond, where we're dealing with the tribunal. Tribunals have been held before, and tribunals will be held again, and it's important that how the organisation is organised, how it is structured, the skills of the people that are there at that particular time will sustain us through the next couple of years while we're dealing with this specific tribunal. The importance of our work that's done on a daily basis, when we're all at home, the work that's done in the communities at night time, every engagement we have with the public. And we think that the processes that we have in place now, the training that we have in place, the supports that we have in place has improved over the last year or two, and that will continue to improve. So there's a number of initiatives in place that will help us sustain our operations and our efficiency and our effectiveness over the next couple of years, and we will continue to improve and we'll continue to work. It's not finished. It's not perfect. There's still a lot more work to do to get to the ideal state, but we have started. We're happy that we have made improvements, and we will continue to make those improvements, both from a cultural perspective, how we deal with our own staff, how we engage with the community externally. So there are various different elements, and all of this will all come together. It's all set out under our MRP, and as that all comes together, as the various different initiatives roll out, it will help us make that shift that we all long to see, and create the organisation that we all long and work so hard to develop.
Can I just offer you 3 metrics that I think go to the heart of your question, Vicky? We are seeing no reduction at all in the number of people that want to join the organisation through the various points in our selection process. It is very clearly unimpacted, which we're very conscious of and very anxious to keep under observation. The second data point is internal applications. You have 31 applications for the highest levels. We are looking forward to your progress with that competition and its outcome. And certainly the third data point is really critical. The feedback loops around both internal applications and external, those who want to join the organisation. Those feedback loops are being monitored constantly and in real time, and they are positive. So we are too looking at a very same reason as you raised the question. It's critical. And there is a confidence expressed.
I think those are very valid points, and as I stated, I think Irish people have been long-standingly committed to trusting the organisation, and we are inclined that way. But at the same time, we have also set very ambitious targets in this year's policing plan, in particular areas around the reporting of sexual offences, hate crime, domestic violence issues we've been discussing, and all of those are absolutely reliant on people being confident on the service that they're going to receive when they come forward, on being confident that the data is going to be captured. You've mentioned issues around data quality and issues around data protection as well, which have arisen in recent times. So I do take those points, but I think there are enormous challenges have been set. And I guess my point is more around there have been delays in the realisation of reforms planned under the MRP to date. There are already issues with that. And in that context where this reform is all the more necessary because of ongoing issues, I just have a real concern about, in that stress point, how the organisation is going to achieve those reforms.
Yeah, I was just going to make the point that in terms of the impact on morale and the existence and the establishment of the tribunal, I think that much of the commentary that has taken place to date has taken place in an environment where we are totally restricted in how we may respond. To that extent, the establishment of the tribunal, I think, can improve the situation. Everybody will have an opportunity to see and hear what the responses will be in due course. And I think in the long term, that will have in itself a very positive impact on that very issue.
And Vicky, if I could, specifically, because there are issues that we have completely committed to around particularly our more vulnerable victims. I think, as John has said, we have three important internal and external metrics, but also our public attitude survey and the oversight of the performance from the authority. I think one of the big things that's going to help, and John O'Driscoll or John Toomey can come in here, is the rollout of the Regional Protective Services Bureaus. So working with the National Protective Services Bureau, particularly around and the media campaign that we mentioned earlier, around raising awareness around issues of domestic violence, around issues of child safety, and making sure that we actually ensure the confidence of people in coming forward to report crime. And that's something that we can measure through our public attitude survey. As you're aware from previous meetings, Gertrude and his team are doing victim focus groups as well. And I think that will give us a good benchmark as well to make sure that we're moving in the right direction.
Well, I mean, that is one of the points that last June we had discussed and had hoped to see before the end of last year. Do we have an update on when we can expect that?
On the focus groups?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've procured a company to run them for us now. They should be in the field, if not next week, the subsequent week, with the results in early April. The delays were procurement delays.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. Just to follow up on Vicky's question, the general attitude survey, when will we expect the next one? Because it will be interesting to monitor the impact in this particular time to see does it.
So we will have the 2016 report. We're working on that right now. So the 2016 report should be ready for March. But as I kind of highlighted in some previous meetings and in the private meetings, what we're hoping to do is also to release data on a quarterly basis now. So I think I can't give you a definitive timeline on that one, but I suppose that would be the interesting one in terms of if we want to have a look at some of the changes or impacts, that would be the one to have a look at.
But even hypothetically, would Q1 be ready by mid-year?
Oh yeah.
So you know what I'm trying to see is trying to see the impact of events and the impact of on public confidence, because I think that's the real test.
In a broad estimation, I'd say Q1 might be ready about May time.
Okay.
On a very broad one now.
I won't hold you to that.
Don't hold me to
I'll
it,
hold
no.
you to mid-year. John, if you don't mind, Commissioner, if I ask John a third metric or a fourth metric, you gave us very positive metrics about people joining. Is there a rush for the door?
Well, frankly, no.
But I think that's an important one.
Well, it is.
In an organisation where people may leave on a voluntary basis.
And Chairman, we have some reasons for that are very tangible. I think there's a recognition that in light of certain changes in the pay award made courtesy of the Labour Court recommendation in November, there are clearly more incentives to remain and remain longer. So we are seeing a decline, admittedly not a significant decline as yet, but anecdotally we are given to understand that this will likely continue, and that the number of retirees that we would normally gauge at about 300 per annum will likely decline. And that coming at a time when our recruitment numbers this year our intake in the college will be actually 900. It has ratcheted up 100 since I spoke to you last. We are going to see an acceleration in the number of uniformed guards available to the Commissioner for deployment, coupled with that which John Toomey and I are leading out on in terms of the work that Joe discussed in the private meeting. I think we're going to see a visibility quotient increase right throughout the country.
Okay, thank you for that. Maureen Lynott has some questions now on performance.
Is this on? Yeah, it will when you start talking. Oh, is that what happens? Okay. Yes, Commissioner, this relates to the performance of the service given the matters at hand. My first question is, have you addressed, and maybe could you describe how to us, some of the significant process issues underlying the current matters at hand for shorthand for the current situation? A couple of examples include protected disclosure policy, which needed improvement and has to be lived, not just on paper. This has, I know you've revised it and the authority has reviewed it and it's now in the process of being implemented. So I'll park that one. We can talk later about how it's working over time. But the other is Garda engagement with the media that I'd like to have you address. It certainly appears to have been over this past while around this situation, at times inappropriate, loose, and sometimes malicious. And what are you doing to address this?
Okay, Maureen, if I just take maybe the PD point, and as you say, and as you've pointed out...
No, we're happy on the PD point because it's it's being implemented now.
Okay. Well, maybe just to update and more for...
We will be having a discussion under the Code of Ethics on the broader speaking up piece, which Bob will be taking up before the end of the meeting.
We can deal with that because we have some, I suppose, significant developments as well with the PD policy and the Code of Ethics. And we were delighted to be able to work with the authority in reviewing it. And we have some structures, additional processes, and we have some additional work. So happy to deal with it under the Code of Ethics. In relation to... I suppose a couple of very high-level points I'd like to make about the role of An Garda Síochána in society. An Garda Síochána, through our interactions with individual citizens, be there in the capacity as victims, as individual citizens of the state that we come into contact with, as victims of crime, as perpetrators of crime, or as suspects of crime, or just general engagement, we are very privileged to come into possession of very sometimes personal, sometimes very sensitive information about individuals and their families and about individual circumstances. We don't take that responsibility lightly. We take it extraordinarily serious, and certainly from both a data protection point of view and also our statutory and legislative responsibilities around safeguarding information around individuals. And, you know, unfortunately, we found ourselves in a situation in recent times where we came in for criticism from a number of both the judiciary, from members of the public, from public representatives, and indeed a number of GSOC investigations in relation to inappropriate and unofficial leaks to the media, including from statutory inquiries. And it's something that we, and certainly I, feel very passionately about. The role of the media is very significant also in society. And, you know, particularly reporting matters in the public interest. And there is a very important role to be played by all of the parties here. I think what's very important is that we make sure that our processes and our systems and our structures are there that meet both of those interests and at the same time protect the interests of the individual citizens. And what we have done, and certainly over the last 3 years, We've put a number of additional systems into place and also structures. And I know Andrew McLinden, who's our Director of Communications, is sitting in the audience as opposed to sitting here at the table. But Andrew can actually give a presentation to the authority maybe at the next meeting in terms of our communication strategy, how it has changed, how our engagement with the media, making sure that we get the stories out there, that we deal with issues as soon as they, even before they become issues, that we're more transparent, more open. We have done a number of regional training seminars around the country, training up some of our people, and also then making sure that our internal structures are in place. And Eugene or John?
Well, but maybe I think what I'm trying to get at is every organization, and yours is certainly a large and disparate one, decentralized, but every organization has to have protocols on arrangements and relations with the media. Of course, you want a healthy relationship with the media, and they're a very important part of our state. But when it's used for communicating maliciously or loosely or casually, then it's not in the interest of the media or the state, and certainly not around data protection and confidentiality. That's what I'm talking about. How are you addressing that at this point in time?
Well, John Toomey here on my right as Deputy Commissioner Operations has a weekly meeting, and I suppose we have choices to make. There's a lot of inaccurate information goes into the public domain. And, you know, again, we have to balance whether or not we always address that inaccurate information. And some of it is very, very personal, not just to me, but very personal to individuals. And we have put new structures in place. John, do you want to talk about your weekly meetings?
We look at each and every issue from the media on a case-by-case basis. There are very clear guidelines and structures in place as to how we engage both from the centre, but also on a regional basis. We have trained people up. We have appointed local spokesperson, and we have given them the proper skills and training. And everybody is clear as to the process, as to how we go through with that and how we follow. All of our people are aware that this is the proper structural process that we follow. But we do examine each of the various different issues on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. But how? I guess what I'm trying to get to is how do you uphold a standard within the Guards of appropriate communication with the media?
Through
and by that I mean whereby people's personal information and data protection requirements are preserved.
Through the structures that we are putting in place, and we don't have them perfected yet, because I think one of the issues that we were dealing with, and I mentioned legacy things earlier on, and certainly there may have been a perception that there wasn't enough information getting out, not my perception, but a perception that there wasn't enough information getting out into the media, and indeed getting out into the public domain. So making sure that our policies are more transparent, and also making sure that the appropriate information gets out there as quickly as possible through the structures in our communications department that we have in place. We also have structures now put in place right around the country, and the communications team, and indeed I have to say part of our, I know the authority members are aware of this, we have looked for additional skilled resources for our communications department, because to be fair to the team that are there, they're moving from what was a traditional press office to actually becoming a strategic communications department. And there is a huge transition to be made there. In the interim, what we have done is making sure that we are working very closely with our people in our regions that are especially trained, getting the information out there, adopting a policy, and you'll see it in our report to the authority, adopting a policy of having more visibility publicly, and not just through the media, but indeed in relation to public fora as well. And getting as much information pre-publication is another part of the policy, making sure we get as much information out there and being very transparent about that, but also then making sure that we actually do have the safeguards in place for the protection of individual data.
And do members of the force who are exposed to the public, and which are most of you, and your management group, Do they have a very clear, have they received a very clear message about the integrity of personal and confidential information? So that what apparently has occurred cannot occur again?
Yes, and the people we are put forward to the media get specific training in this area, exactly what they can say, what they can't say, and all about the integrity of the entire process. We want to get as much information as possible out to the media, but protecting within the necessary limitations of current legislation.
And we do have policies and procedures, and we were delighted as well working with the authority. It's actually reinforced in the Code of Ethics, as you know, and that has gone to every single member of An Garda Síochána.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Can I
My
just
second
raise-
question, yeah, go ahead, Joe.
I think for specificity on the area of personal data in particular, Maureen, my organisation is the custodian of all of the files for the 16,000 people that we have in the organisation, and that historic archive of material for everybody who ever worked for the organisation. We treat that extraordinarily carefully, and right now, based upon current controversy, we are revisiting some of the policies that the Commissioner mentioned. In the aggregate, and from data that we are seeking to develop into a very detailed workforce plan, we've agreed with the Department of Justice a protocol around a document called Publish. And this is information that we're planning to put up on the web, which is an aggregation of a whole series of materials to ensure that the public out there can see what it is and how it is we're managing the data in aggregate. And the final thing I think is dealt with by Deputy Commissioner Toomey in relation to pulse data. I know that around 6.8 there's been a particular focus on ensuring that that which is contained in that particular archive is managed and maintained appropriately.
Okay, Commissioner, I'd like to move on now to, again, around the current situation, that kind of phrase we're using, issues concerning Garda culture and values, okay, and which at this point seem quite pronounced. And this must be having an impact on the Garda service, both at management and at serving Garda level. I can't imagine that it wouldn't. In your view, what is that impact? And what are you doing as the leader of the organization to address that?
Well, it's something as a team that, and I, as the Commissioner, am very, very conscious of. And obviously there is, there's a huge impact. There's a huge impact in terms of the perception, which we've just discussed, but also what we have to do to make sure that we keep that resilience there and the capacity as well. So I use the two words, capacity, culture, or three words, capacity, culture, and resilience, and making sure that we address the attitudes and the behaviours and the values that prevent this from happening again. When I say this, I mean everything, and the impact on all of us personally and professionally, and all of our members personally and professionally, and making sure that we have robust systems in place. I mentioned earlier on in terms of not just the Code of Ethics, but around ethical leadership in particular, and ethical values and dilemmas, and starting a training programme and setting the tone from the top. So the first thing we're doing is, John, is arranging a training session, and it's not a training session just for the sake of having a training session, but I think it's actually beginning to address the cultural issues, outing some of the issues, and there's been lots, again, of public commentary around various issues within the organisation. And, I think there's some of those are fair, some of them are not quite so fair. But I think the training that we are doing, that will be cascaded and driven right down through the organisation to all of the teams. And something that was mentioned earlier, I think it's very important at times like this, from my experience over 36 years, is to make sure that there is visible leadership, and to make sure that we keep our focus on what the very onerous responsibilities that we have to do, and making sure that we're out there for our people and for the community. So again, getting out, getting around the country, around stations, around regions, and making sure that we are seen out there, and that we listen very carefully to people. We listen what their concerns are around the current issues that are in the public domain, and not just listen, but that we hear them and we action what their concerns are.
Okay. And in terms of communication with the management team and then with serving Gardaí down from the management team. Have you come up with a program of messages of addressing the situation in terms of it is real, it's before you, it does have an impact. You can't answer every question, but there's no taking away that it has to be felt as difficult for the force.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of communications are members, your management group and members receiving?
We have a fixed set of meetings that we hold, at least one per month at the senior management level, where these messages, this discussion can happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then that can be cascaded. And since we had our full executive team put in place last autumn, we've been able to get out into the regions. And we've managed to visit all regions before Christmas. And it is our intention from now on that we would, just after the first quarter of the year and in the fourth quarter, that we would get to visit each region and meet with the management teams of each of those, as well as meet as many of the people who work in those areas at that time as well. That gives us opportunities not just to bring that message that you spoke of, which is important to whatever the current issues are, but also to deal with all the other challenges that we face in relation to the implementation of the MRP, the effect of the new ICT projects at the front line, how that's being embedded, and also to get a sense of how that culture piece is changing. So that's the intention we have over the coming year.
Okay. But in the near term, given the situation as it is, and the prominence of it, what have you what would the messages be? I presume you'll agree messages. What will the messages be in those management meetings and the cascade meetings? Have you done any of them yet?
There's lots of frustration on behalf of some of our a lot of our members in terms of the inaccuracies that are portrayed about the. Unfortunately, and I think Eugene touched off it earlier, unfortunately some of those inaccuracies we cannot correct at the moment, and there needs to be an understanding of that from our own members. So I think explaining that, so to answer you, what have we done? I think one of the things is actually explaining the context in which this is happening. And I think the Chair put it very succinctly at the outset, and explaining that to our members. You know, people feel that we should be out there explaining and putting the factual position in relation to some matters into place, but also making sure that actually, and I mentioned about listening, and I don't say that lightly, because people have different concerns. They're concerned, and I know that under the Code of Ethics we'll talk about the speaking up, but they're concerned as well about the impact that it's having on their local community and the impact that it may have. So be sure that we're there. We have our internal portal as well, and John, or either the Johns, can talk about what we're doing with that. Do you want to?
First of all, I think it's very important, as Eugene Corcoran has said, there is a frustration that there is another view of events that it has not been aired yet. And I think giving the assurance, and certainly when I'm talking to my staff, I'm assuring them that this public inquiry is going to be the platform where all the information can come out and in an appropriate manner and can be judged in an equitable manner by the Honourable Judge Charlton. So I think there's great reassurance among personnel within the Garda Síochána. Many who, like myself, very much welcome the fact that it is a public inquiry and that the opportunity will be there to provide all this information. And bearing in mind, they know this information, but they just cannot impart their knowledge of particular events without having a forum such as the public inquiry. So I believe that as time progresses and as the inquiry is taking place, people will, any dint in confidence will be restored. And I think people understand the concept of there being two sides to any story. And it's a bit like listening to the defence side of a criminal trial and walking out and having a vote on whether you believe the person is guilty or not without ever listening to the other side of the equation. And you will always get a certain view of events in those circumstances. So I think people are very much reassured by the fact that all the information will come out and will be dealt with in what everyone seems to believe will be a fair manner by the Honourable Judge Charlton.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Maureen. Before we move on, I was interested because I take the view that engagement with the media can be hugely improved if more and more information is made available, just as a matter of course, on websites. So I'm interested in this Publish project. Do you have timelines for that, or when?
We've just agreed the protocol in and around Publish at the last joint Justice and Garda review group, and we meet monthly. We are planning to deliver on a quarterly basis a set of aggregate statistics on the deployment of the organisation, its various grades and ranks right throughout the country, data in relation to gender, and we want to make certain that this information allows people to take a look at, in effect, the rudiments of the service that is being deployed and feel confident and comforted by the extent of its availability around the country. Station opening hours as an example.
When would one see additional material available publicly that isn't available now?
At the end of this first quarter will be the first tranche of data. The formats were agreed over the last 7 months with the Department of Justice.
Okay, we look forward to that. And while I'm on that note, we do also acknowledge the value of the monthly publication of the Commissioner's report to the authority, because that is new, that wasn't published before. We will be continuing to work with you to enrich that report as well, but it's another contribution to the public, to the transparency of your management information at the very least. I was going
if
then.
I may disturb, Chair, for 1 second there.
Yes,
apologies.
John.
Just in addition to the point that John Barrett has made there, we have adopted a practice of making a number of our policies public. So we actually, as we have introduced a number of policies over the last 12 months, we have put them up on our website and make them available to the public, and we will continue that. And as we go on, we have recently signed off on a crime prevention strategy and our domestic violence, an updated domestic violence strategy. As they are completed, they will also be put up on the website. So as new policies come on stream, we will put them up on the website.
Which begs the question, the new website, what's the timeline? Because your website is extraordinarily crowded, and that's not your fault. Timeline for the new website, roughly?
I think it's the end of Q1, early Q2.
Okay. So the combination of a new website and additional information being made available is a contribution to the issue that Maureen was exploring. Okay, does that help? Thank you, Maureen. I'm now going to invite Valerie Judge to ask some questions in the area, well, principally in the area of child protection, but...
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think the authority is very concerned about public confidence in relation to the whole area of child protection. I think there's a context to this that's quite relevant, really, for a discussion for today and for talking about what happens now and what happens going forward. I suppose we have the Children First Act 2015, and while there were guidelines before that, it's now legislation which give yourselves and other agencies particular roles and responsibilities. You hear me there? We'll have more legislation and more, you're always dealing with new legislation coming down the line, but obviously even only yesterday the President signed off the new Criminal Sexual Offences Act, which, among other things, provides for crimes such as grooming children, etc. And obviously that's all about keeping pace with technology. So I think there are parents out there concerned about the protection of their children. There are adults out there who may have had experiences as children and may be ready or, at some stage wanting to come forward to make allegations or to give information. So I suppose we're very concerned that in the context of all the media attention on this area, that matters can progress and progress effectively. So the other context, I suppose, that I wanted to raise, and you've already referred to it, probably answered my questions, is the Modernisation and Renewal Programme. And in Chapter 2, where you've got specific initiatives around this area. So I was pleased to hear you refer there to the Protective Services units and the confidential phone line, which I was going to ask you about, and you might come back on that in a minute. So that's just the context, and really, I suppose what I'm saying is the world has moved on very quickly in this area in recent years. So we need to really focus on now and the future, and all in the context that everybody out there can be sure that their children will be safe and that the Gardaí will play their role in that. So my questions really, for all our benefits, would be, the first question, could you describe for us the process And by the way, we tend to talk about process and protocols. I'm very conscious it's your people who implement these things. So it's what people do when I talk about process. Can you describe the process that should happen now when the Garda Síochána become aware of an alleged suspected case of child abuse? Who should do what at this point?
Okay, well, first of all, we're all aware of the Child First National Guidance for the Protection and Welfare of Children, Children First document. Now that is due for updating, and an updated version will be available shortly. And the main reason for the updating is to take into account the provisions of the 2015
Act. Yeah.
And there are significant changes in that. And while I will talk about the way in which we deal with reporting particular issues at the moment, it is significant that one of the changes that has to be catered for in the new document is mandatory reporting, and there's a mandatory aspect to the reporting which is introduced in the 2015 Act. But as it stands currently, the reporting by the Garda Síochána to TUSLA is dealt with at paragraph 7 of the current version, where it says that wherein Garda Síochána suspects that a child has been or is being the victim of emotional, physical or sexual abuse or neglect, whether willful or unintentional, the HSE must be formally notified in accordance with the procedure set out at paragraph 774. It is not necessary for Garda Síochána to have sufficient evidence to support a criminal prosecution before notifying the HSE. So there is a standard notification form, and by the way, that form has been updated, and there is a new version which will issue along with the updated version of the Child First guidelines. But that standard notification form is prepared initially by the member of the Garda Síochána who becomes aware of a particular matter which is to be provided or to be reported to TUSLA. But from the Garda perspective, in a report going to TUSLA rather than the other direction, we ensure that it goes through another channel. It goes to the superintendent and only forwarded to TUSLA, having been examined by the superintendent. So therefore, if there are inaccuracies or some matters that have inadvertently been put in a document which is created by the Garda, the member of the Garda Síochána, typically at Garda rank, but maybe at sergeant rank, that can be picked up by the superintendent. Then the document is transmitted, as I say, to TUSLA. The social worker assigned to the case will make direct contact then with the designated Garda in charge of the case in order to obtain the details. And then when contact is established, both the designated Garda and the social worker commence completion of a record of Garda/HSE liaison form. So there's a particular form in which all the liaison will be recorded. And at the same time, the superintendent assigns a particular designated inspector or sergeant to manage the investigation, monitor its progress, and to consult with the appointed HSE manager of the case. Now, there is a plan.
Sorry, Justin, you've mentioned now both HSE and TUSLA there, so just to be clear,
well, we're talking
about, you're talking about the same organisation, or are you talking about
we're talking about obviously TUSLA having taken over the HSE.
Yeah.
I think the 2011 document was introduced before
it's TUSLA.
Yeah.
Okay.
Among the changes, and of course we've spoken about, and the Commissioner and others have spoken about the local victims support offices and protection offices, but the creation of the Garda National Protective Services Bureau in itself was the initial step that was taken in this area. And indeed, in terms of dealing with victims, and you specifically mentioned grooming, we brought the whole area of human trafficking out of the Garda National Immigration Bureau and brought it into the Protective Services Bureau, and many of the non-government organisations were very anxious that that would take place. But there is a plan to create a National Child Protection Unit within the Garda National Protective Services Bureau. And a competition which has taken place recently, we now have the results of it in terms of sergeants and guards who have been successful. And within 1 month, additional resources, considerable resources will go into the Garda Protective Services Bureau. And among the initiatives that they will utilise the additional personnel for will be the creation of a National Child Protection Unit. And among the functions of that unit, which it is recommended that we'll have an inspector, a sergeant, 2 detective Gardaí, and there is a plan that there will be a social worker who will be seconded from Tusla, who will work full-time within that unit, and that will help to ensure that the communications between the 2 agencies are done in an appropriate and timely manner.
When is that likely to happen, can you say?
Well, it is likely that the child protection units could be up and running. The staff could be there within 1 month in terms of the initial Garda staff. And once that is in place, we will then excel the dealings with the Tusla so that we can ensure that as soon as possible they can add their input into the Bureau. But one of the important aspects that it is planned that Bureau will have, or that unit within the Bureau will have, is a monitoring and an auditing function where they will go out into districts and divisions and examine how all these reports have been dealt with within a specific division.
Okay, because you're answering my next question, because that's what I was going to ask you. How do you embed all of these processes down, audit you're mentioning, and what plans are in place so that your people on the ground, your Gardaí on the ground, are adequately trained and equipped to deal with these very sensitive issues and to address them compassionately and sensitively, while at the same time being very thorough?
Well, indeed, I wanted to speak yesterday to the superintendent in charge of this area, and I couldn't get him because he was out in a particular division dealing with these changes and explaining to that particular division how it will operate, what the input from how it will operate within the division, what the interaction will be from the national unit. So all of that was being addressed. I think it's important to realise that the sort of figures we're talking about in terms of reporting is somewhere between 17,000 and 20,000 reports. Now that is an awful lot of reporting.
In what period?
Within a year.
A year,
and therefore it's, where occasionally things go wrong, it has to be seen, I think, in that context. But we believe that this additional monitoring that will be done from the centre, and again with the input from Tusla within the Bureau, that will certainly ensure that a lot of what has gone wrong in the past will be avoided into the future.
Yeah, and could you tell us a little bit more about the training of people and the support of people working in the protective services units?
Well, all the staff there are going through training in the various areas, in specific areas, in terms of dealing with victims, in terms of specialising in terms of interviewing of children. All of these specialist aspects of dealing with children, the staff are receiving training, and indeed, no different to when I was involved in the human trafficking area. I went abroad and attended IOM organised conferences on human trafficking, 3 or 4 places abroad, and we brought in best practice, and we also utilised training available from places such as Europol. So any training that is available that will enhance the capacity and the ability of the personnel to do their functions is utilised.
And could you tell me a little bit about a situation where maybe an adult now wants to report something that happened in the past, a historical event? What's the procedure or process?
Can I ask both of you now to be really careful?
Yeah, sorry, okay. Well, let's leave that question. It's okay. We can move on.
We can deal with it another time.
Yeah, we can deal different. Yeah, I wasn't really going that direction, but I don't want to be misconstrued. That's fine. Maybe just my final question, actually.
Could I just maybe add one point to what John has said?
It's really an adult today, but something is, but yeah.
In advance of the training process, there is a selection process. So anybody who wants to become part of the protective service units would have to express an interest in becoming there, and then they will have to go through a selection process.
Okay.
So it's not just a case that, we are taking this very serious, and we'll be looking for people with the right skills at the outset, and then we will put them through the training process. So there are a number of steps to it before they head into it, and that's in addition to what John has said.
Okay. I've one last question, and just to reassure the Chair, I'm talking about now and in the future, not anything to do with anything that may in the past. And again, it's for the reassurance of the public. What is the process today if an allegation is made against a member of your own, one of your own members or one of your civilian staff, indeed? What is your own internal process in terms of the criminal side and the discipline side?
The report is treated in exactly the same way as a report in respect of any other potential culprit. The matter is reported in the way that's been described by John in terms of the obligations under the Children First, and is investigated from a criminal perspective, and indeed, if depending on the circumstances, from every other aspect, including disciplinary, if that's appropriate.
Okay.
But certainly, it's treated no differently than any other complaint. It may require, because it's a member of Garda Síochána, it may require that the question of suspension would be considered, or a question of redeployment or transfer in lieu of suspension, depending on the circumstances. But there are issues that follow from the initial report and from the initial investigation of it.
Okay.
I think one of the, if it was a complaint of a criminal offence,
Yes.
it would also be referred to GSOC.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Of course, civilians are not, don't come into the same process if it's
They wouldn't come into the
GSOC
GSOC process, but they
It's
would
just
come
the one
into your own
difference.
internal processes. Finally, and thank you very much for that, finally, just maybe to ask you to tell us a little bit more, you referred to earlier the confidential phone line for victims of child sexual abuse. When will it be up and running? Who will be staffing it, and how will they be trained?
I think it's due for launching on the 4th of next month.
Okay.
And it will be manned by personnel within our command and control centre. That is my understanding of it. And through experience of having some of these numbers for other reasons, free phone numbers, we deem it most efficient that it will be dealt with in command and control, where there are people who are used to call taking, and where there is a 24-hour a day service provided.
So that's a professional service for victims and maybe guardians of victims? Is it?
Well, whoever wishes to
call.
report.
And will you be publicising that helpline?
Yeah, there will be a
in
launch
advance?
going with it, I think.
Okay.
Commissioner,
Yeah, we have
Okay.
a launch next week,
Yeah.
and there will be a publicity campaign around it as well.
Okay.
Another important aspect, as John said, there are specific members who are trained to take the calls.
Yeah. I think going forward, Chair, in meetings, we'd be very interested in the effectiveness and measuring the effectiveness of all of these measures. But thank you. I think it's reassuring today, just in the broader context of concerns people have. And at the end of the day, in the interest of the protection of our children, I think that's reassuring. So thank you.
Thanks, Valerie. I suppose we spoke in our private meeting, and it's another issue we'll be keeping an eye on in terms of the impact of this period. If it was to have a negative impact on the reporting of crime, whether it was children or anything else, we would certainly be concerned, and we'll be looking at that data as well in due course, because it was already a risk in some areas of underreporting, and so anything that might make that problem worse would be something that would be of concern to the authority. So against that background, launching a hotline and encouraging people to come forward is very reassuring. Before we move on to the Code of Ethics, there's an open sweep across my side of the table. Anybody, any of my colleagues? Vicky?
Just a small follow-up on the training point there, because we've discussed previously about the training of child interferers, and we got follow-up numbers, and while there are a lot of your members undertaking the training, the number that had completed it was quite small. And I guess, I mean, I don't anticipate that you would have those figures, but I think we would like to see updates on that as we go, because I think, I'm very conscious of the amount of, like, just even sitting here, the number of different reforms you're discussing and the number of those that involve training, the drain on the college in terms of provision of that training, but also of human resource time to take people out to do the training, and balancing that is obviously very difficult, but it's completely essential that people are trained on these things. And so I guess I have a concern about the pace with which that training is being completed on that and other issues. So just to say that I think updates on that would be good, because I think I think it was single figures that had actually completed that training to date. From memory, I can't find the document, but yeah.
Well, one of the difficulties in the past has been that people have been trained. Indeed, I've been trained in things that I never really implemented, but this is where the dedicated units and having a dedicated bureau for a start, and then the dedicated units will ensure that where these people are trained, that they are going to be engaged in the type of work associated with what they're trained for on a regular and continuous basis.
I think
Can I
there
say
is
one thing that I think is really useful that you, as an authority, are aware of. We're very much looking forward to hosting you in the college for a meeting in, I think, the May session, if I'm not mistaken. And in advance of that, work has begun to give you a broad sweep of the activities which are in that training plan. And your assessment is quite correct. It is a huge resource draw for the organisation, but we too see it as essential. And we'll show you the extent of that when you're on college property in May, and we look forward to that.
I think there's nobody here going to underestimate the huge effort and cost in time and opportunity that will be required in that broad training programme. But there is a particular issue about a commitment we received in relation to the training. So it's not the point John is making. We've all gotten trained in our lives and perhaps we didn't use the training. This is actually the training has not been completed in relation to people who are interviewing children. And that's just to underline where the question started. And we're not, as I say, expecting you to know the answer today. The last time we got the data, it was a bit light. John, you have some figures, I think.
I've just been handed a document here to say that we have 73 child specialist interviewers. So we can certainly clarify any...
Fully trained?
No, the last figures we got, which is in the last couple of months, was that something in around that number had begun the training and was at stage 2, but only a very small number had completed stage 3 of the training.
We can
update it for us, please.
And that was just in January.
Sure. I think on another point, there is a training governance board. Like the points that have been made are absolutely accepted about the training capacity, both from the Garda College to deliver, but also from the organisation to absorb. We have to be very conscious of all these things, and we have to try and balance these demands. So certainly we're very conscious of that, and the issue with the training governance board keep an oversight role on that right throughout the year.
Well, if we could have those figures at the next meeting updated. Yeah.
And just maybe, Chair, a point in relation to the Training Governance Board, all of the points that have been made by the authority members, and as John has said with the visit to the college, the Governance Board is very focused on the prioritisation of training initiatives, because picking up on John's point, there's no point in training people who are not going to be there in the longer term. So identifying who are the core group that need training, what is the training requirement, and then balancing that against the opportunity and abstraction costs as well.
Just before we go off training, it's an opportunity for me to just reflect something we've been discussing in the authority, in that we would want to play our part in contributing to your training programmes where we can, either at foundation level in particular, because now that the Code of Ethics is established and we do have a function in relation to the performance management of members and so on, we're keen to play our part in assisting with your work by contributing to your training programmes where that can be managed. So we look forward to discussing that also in May when we get down to the college, John. I'm going to move on to the Code of Ethics piece now, if I may, and Pat is going to begin. Pat Costello, who chaired our Code of Ethics Committee.
Thanks, Chair. First of all, I'm very pleased, Commissioner, that you've raised the Code of Ethics very early in your comments, and that's good news. I think, though, in a way, the easy work was to come up with the code, even though it was a significant piece of work. But the real challenge now, and even to make promises is probably easy as well, but the real challenge now is to implement. I think we all know that, and I think we're all conscious that that is a significant challenge. However, though, the authority does consider that the code can be a very important catalyst in cultural reform in the Garda Síochána. And I think recent events and recent controversies, I suppose, heightens the urgency of cultural reform. Now, we do recognise the many positive aspects of the Garda Síochána culture and the values, and that the code builds on that. I also want to acknowledge the commitment of the Garda Commissioner yourself in the foreword and in the comments that you made at the launch, and indeed the enthusiasm of John, significant enthusiasm of John Barrett. The main point we want to get across is that we believe it will require leadership at the highest level to embed this code right throughout the Garda Síochána. I suppose in the policing plan there are a number of commitments. The first one is in Q1 to deliver an internal communications plan, and in Q2 to deliver a training commitment. I suppose that's my first question to you. Can you confirm now or assure us that these commitments will be met on time?
Yes, Pat, and thank you for your comments, because, and again, I'd like to take the opportunity again to acknowledge the considerable effort that went in from the authority members and indeed from our own members, and a number of people led out on it, and John Toomey here has taken the strategic lead with John Barrett on it. So I might get John to talk through precisely, but what we can say is, and I mentioned earlier on, the tone will be set from the top. So the training will start at the top but be driven down through the organisation. And John, do you want to talk about?
Yeah, well, I will hand it off to John Barrett momentarily in terms of giving you the detail and the progress. But I suppose the outset, as your question was, will we meet those guidelines? And yes, we will. Okay. And in terms of the executive support, I think the senior leadership management team are the first group in the organisation that are going to undergo training. And I think John Barrett can give us the detail around that. And in fairness to John, he has done a lot of work in terms of putting together a programme which we think will achieve the objectives that we all want to achieve.
Okay. And maybe a question for the Commissioner again, sorry, because I really want to get it at the highest level, and I respect your views, John. Just Commissioner yourself, what do you think is the role of the Code of Ethics in the cultural reform programme?
I think, as we said at the launch, Pat, you know, the ethical behaviour and ethical values are something that have driven An Garda Síochána since its foundation. And I think it's very useful to have the Code of Ethics, which not just codifies, because as you say yourself, we can codify, and it's a very succinct, a very short document, but it codifies the behaviours and the values that have driven An Garda Síochána. And indeed, John mentioned the number of people who applied to join the organisation. You know, that sense of public service values, that ethical and the ethical driven behaviours, that's what we desire in members that join, and then making sure that we have systems in place to monitor those behaviours. But those behaviours, those attitudes, and the shift in those behaviours and attitudes is what will slowly change the culture of the organisation. But that's why when we talk about shifting the culture, and thank you again for recognising, you know, the good things about the culture of An Garda Síochána, and I think that's important to recognise, and that's what has sustained us, and indeed sustained the Irish state over the last 94 years, and what will sustain us into the future. I think it's excellent to have the values and the behaviours codified in the manner that they are. But I think, as you say, this is where the embedding of those throughout the organisation and the monitoring of those throughout the organisation, then that's where it really comes into play. And that's what John, to be fair, has been leading out and working on.
Okay. And can I just ask you what steps so far that you have taken to ensure that this is a priority? Because if it's not a priority I suppose, at the very top of the organisation, it's difficult. It'd be difficult for John to implement it, despite his great energy and enthusiasm. So I'd be interested in, you know, how you're going to lead it and give us any steps you've taken so far. For example, is it a standing item on the management agenda, for example?
Well, as John Toomey has just outlined, it starts with the top team. Right. And that has already started, and that will continue, and John can give you the detail of how that will continue.
Okay, John, so give us some detail then.
Chair, Pat, let me begin by saying the interaction with the authority around this has been hugely energising, and I think credit to you. You had an agenda and a timeline, and you've met yours, the challenges for us to meet ours, and we will reciprocate. So I'd like to give credit to Pat and the authorities team in leading out on this. For me and for everybody who touches this, the Commissioner, the senior management team, everybody in the organisation, I think it's about behaviour. And I think you've captured it extremely well in the leadership element in that 9th pillar of the Code of Ethics. I will aim to behave in a manner which brings credit on An Garda Síochána and myself, and so promote public confidence in policing. I think that is essentially what we want to inculcate in the organisation and make visible in the interaction. As the Commissioner said, one by one interaction with the public and with the community that we serve by every person in the organisation, reserve, civilian member, sworn member of the organisation, and that it be consistent. So I want to make reference as I begin my remarks on this, and I don't want this to be a long monologue from me. I want to make reference to what you started with, Chair, and that was the context we find ourselves in right now. And at the meeting of my team on Friday of last week, the conclusion was this: it's never the wrong time to do the right thing. So the backdrop against which we're dealing with the Code of Ethics may be fraught with a tribunal and various other media concerns that are going to be played out over the next 18 months, 2 years, whatever it takes. This organisation, from the Commissioner to the latest recruit, will continue to champion the Code of Ethics at all levels in the organisation to make it something which guides behaviour. That's what we're treating as our benchmark for success. And Pat, I think you'll be particularly pleased with a comment from Chief Superintendent Pat Leahy. He said there needs to be some bloodletting around this in typical Pat Leahy fashion, as in we need to make certain that we hold each other to account for the content of the Code of Ethics. And I think that will make it real and make it consequential and make it visible to everybody in the organisation that this matters. So what have we done? Let me begin by saying that we were delighted to have the opportunity to put together some materials for your group, Pat. And we made it clear that from the very get-go of this quarter, in the Garda College, for the foundation training programs and for all of the promotional programs that we run, the decision-making model, which already included ethical considerations, now specifically deals with those ethical considerations under the terms, the 9 pillars of the Code of Ethics. So from, I suppose, the date of the launch, 23 January, we were out of the blocks with work that was in preparation by Margaret Nugent and Brian Conway and the Garda College, and credit to them for that. I think you've alluded to something that is really important, and that if we are going to sustain this, and we are very conscious of this as a team, my colleagues here today, but more broadly in the organisation than just those of us here assembled, we are absolutely certain that our tone and our behaviour must be consistent. There can't be a dissonance between how it is we speak and what it is we do in our action. And to credit the support of John Toomey in this, there will be a holding to account so that there is not that visible dissonance. And I think that is the opportunity that goes with, if you like, doing this in a time of difficulty or crisis, that we get a chance to make that very cultural statement that you talked about, Pat.
Thank you. I really welcome the commitment now to meet the timeline, and it's a good start to have a change of syllabus and the yes. 9 pillars in the Garda College already. Thank you. I think Bob is going to take speaking up now. Is that right, Bob?
Happy to do it at this stage. Thank you. It won't surprise anybody, and it doesn't in the slightest way impinge on the work of the Tribunal of Inquiry, to say that the issue of protected disclosures is going to be very much in the mind and in the newspapers and on the television screens and radio stations of everybody in the state over the next 12, 18 or whatever months until the final report, and then some time after that has been published. And the question is, and this will relate very directly to the Code of Ethics and its provisions, is how do you think people within the organisation, within your organisation, to what extent are they going to be willing, when they deem it necessary, to make protected disclosures in circumstances where there will be such an unremitting focus on the way these issues generally have been handled in the past?
I think there are a number of things, Bob, and I'm glad that we have the opportunity. I mentioned earlier on there have been some significant developments, and I might get John Toomey and indeed Eugene to come in around the PD. So let me just take a look back for a moment. So in April 2014, on the first available opportunity, when I was attending a reserve graduation, and I'd maybe touching off something that Pat said, bringing it right up to current. So I made it very clear that actually it takes a lot of courage to speak up, that actually people not only have a right to speak up, but they also have a responsibility. And that constructive dissent certainly is much better than destructive consent. And we've made that very clear from the bottom up and indeed the top down. And to encourage, and it speaks to the Code of Ethics, to encourage that type of behaviour, that type of attitude. And yes, it takes time to change. And yes, we don't get everything right all of the time, but we have had significant experience in the past, and we have significant experiences now. And we're very keen, and we've committed publicly to learning from those experiences, and indeed learning from the individuals that have had these experiences. And that's something that we're absolutely committed to. Just under, and more than a year ago indeed, there are a number of different groupings that we have asked for help from. We've asked for help from different individuals, and indeed we very much welcome the input from the Policing Authority members, and indeed the resource that you retained to help us actually review our protected disclosure policy. So yes, we have revised our policy. Eugene has taken the lead on that. We have put additional structures in place under Joe and John Barrett, so under the HR structure. So putting in place both a Garda and civilian member at PO and Chief Superintendent level to actually try to manage all of these processes and try to make sure that any areas that were identified as gaps are being addressed. Do we have it perfect? As I say, absolutely not. Are we learning? All of the time. To bolster that up, what we have also done is made sure that actually just under a year ago, and before that we were engaging, and I'll get John Toomey to talk about it in more detail, but with Transparency International, as we'll say recognised experts. And I'd like to make a distinction as well between, there are people who want to make protected disclosures, as in their statutory entitlement to do, but there are also people who want to speak up, literally. And what we have to do is create a safe environment where actually people can speak up, they can raise issues, and I've publicly said this before, that they can have confidence that the issues that they raise will be listened to, will be heard, and will be acted upon. And indeed, some of those issues, they may not always be right, but our commitment is that we will engage with the individuals. And from those individuals that have spoken up, we have learned a lot. And indeed, it has enhanced a lot of our processes, challenged some of our own assumptions about things that we think are happening right and wrong, and also has helped us to develop and evolve as an organisation, and that will continue. But I'm particularly delighted that when we asked Transparency International to come with us, and indeed when we met them first, they were in the throes of launching their Integrity at Work programme, and we met with them and we asked them could we become part of that. And if it's okay, I might let John Toomey tell you the very latest developments, because I've asked John to continue that level of engagement, and we have an update as of today.
Yeah, we've had a series of meetings, and we're about to engage in an Integrity at Work initiative, where this will be led by Transparency International, and it is a commitment by the employer to promote the policy of speaking up and ensuring that the issues raised are dealt with as speedily and as comprehensively as possible. So over the next couple of days we will receive an invitation from Transparency, and then a commitment will be signed. It'll be a joint memorandum signed by both organisations. What will be in this will be a support provided to people who want to raise issues. There will be a helpline where there will be legal support provided to them, and there will also be support during the course of their process. Our people will be able to raise issues with them, and then they can engage with us on their behalf to support them. It will also be a training programme for senior management and a media and awareness campaign internally to raise all of the issues and to make all and each and every member of the organisation aware, providing specific training where it's needed, but certainly raising an awareness right throughout the organisation that our principles and the ethics and the 9 pillars that we talked about. So we will not talk the talk, we'll walk the walk, and we'll live up to each and every one of these principles. We'll hold one another to account, and that this initiative will help us work through it. As part of it, there will be an annual report issued where learning and guidance and areas where we can improve will be provided to us. This is a learning process. We've come a long way in the last 12 months, but as the Commissioner said, have we got it right? No, we haven't. Is there more for us to be done? Yes, there is. Yes, there is. And we will continue to strive, continue to work hard to learn from any mistakes that we will make. We're an organisation of people with the ordinary frailties of everyday people. And we will continue to make mistakes. But what our commitment is that we have a clear code of ethics now, we have a clear desire to promote this integrity at work, and we will continue to do everything that we possibly can to make sure that all of our employees have the necessary supports and the confidence to speak up because of the work that we will do on this side to give them that support.
In the context specifically initially of protected disclosures before moving on to the more general issue, where is the precise locus of responsibility for that now within the organisation?
It resides in the HR side of the house. We have two managers appointed, one at Chief Superintendent level, the other is a civilian at PO level. So they're alternates, and so that people have a choice if they feel there's difficulty on one side. That office is has a dedicated staff, and they deal with all of the correspondence that comes in that manner in a very confidential way.
And that the policy issues in relation to protected disclosures, as well as the practical issues of responding to them, will be located in the human resources.
That's where it is at present. Yes. Yeah.
And
well, I suppose just to be absolutely clear on that, I mean the document itself sets out the role that has been set aside for the human resources in terms of the actual disclosures that are made. The policy level remains at headquarters in terms of our plans and processes for ensuring its implementation, ensuring that the training that's necessary from the very outset when people join the organisation takes place, and also that those involved in supervision at all levels are trained as part of it, as part of their promotional training. But I think the policy side of it and the HR are separate and distinct in terms of what's intended, the functional part, if you like, and in many respects the responsibility rests with all of us to ensure that the policy itself is implemented in exactly the manner in which it's intended. So, for example, the Internal Affairs section currently provides training to all of the courses, including starting with those who join and subsequent promotion courses in respect of it. And I think the endorsement which the authority has given to that policy is something we take great encouragement from. We propose over the course of...
I wouldn't go that far, Eugene. Endorsement, I wouldn't go quite that far.
Well,
we'll talk about that in a minute. Sorry, Bob, for interrupting you.
I certainly took a certain amount of encouragement from the fact the document was well received, and I think in that regard we intend with, and indeed we would appreciate in due course, the assistance of the authority in terms of a review of the document, possibly at the earliest possible time, a review of the entire approach we're taking to this area, and the authority's role or suggestions or assistance in that respect would be greatly appreciated. And certainly if there are areas which perhaps are weak in what we're doing, as has been said already, that this is areas we would be keen to address.
I mean, it's absolutely right to say that the authority gave a comprehensive response and commentary on the initial draft, and we were positively impressed by the speed with which the Garda Síochána accepted the recommendations that were made, and all of those, I think, now have been incorporated into the document as is published. The question remains, though, whether in the present and in the foreseeable circumstances where the issue of protected disclosures will be one of such contention, there is likely to be, even in circumstances where the protections of the statute are implicit in the name of the disclosures that we're talking about, whether there is likely to be a willingness on the part of staff in the Garda Síochána, whether Garda members, civilian members, reserves, to engage with that while this issue is current in and after the tribunal.
I think that's why it's very timely, the initiative that we've taken with Transparency International, because actually people will have a place that they can go which is outside of the Garda organisation but linking into the Garda organisation, and I think that's really important. And also part of that process, Joe and John will be chairing a group which we would very much welcome the authorities' input to, because part of the issues that we are looking at is where is the right sit in the organisation, the sit and the fit in the organisation. As Eugene said, the policy belongs one place, but where does the actual, the initiatives, just sorry John, you were going to come in there.
Yeah, I'm just going to come in by saying there will be a series of regional seminars which we will be supporting at this level, and we will be attending each and every one of those. Of course, you know, the recent controversy that have been in the public domain are of concern to us too. And we certainly want to ensure that our people feel comfortable and have confidence in the system to come forward. So it's something we're very concerned about. It's something we are going to ensure that all of us at the top ensured in every communications we do, everywhere we go around the country, that we will continue to push home the point and try and give the reassurance that our people need. But for sure, you know, the concerns that people have are equally a concern of us, and we are aware of it. And our communications strategy, the actions that have been taken in the various regional seminars, we will continue to work even harder to stress, you know, the importance of feeling comfortable.
On the structural issue, I think that's a point that can be come to at some future stage. Some concern about some bifurcation in the responsibility and whether there is need to be absolutely clear where ownership of all of the elements in relation to this issue resides. I think there can be real values in the involvement and engagement of an external agency, but no organisation can subcontract to another the requirement to have an environment where this kind of openness is important. And that brings me to the central element of the Code of Ethics, which reflects what a Code of Ethics should reflect, but also reflects the statutory provision in relation to reporting of wrongdoing. And simply to note that the Code of Ethics said that the arrangement is one which should support, encourage and facilitate speaking up at every level in the organisation and ensuring that everyone involved is treated fairly. The essential intention of this is that in the normal course of daily engagement throughout the organisation by all people, that there will be that environment in which people can say what they believe, ask an awkward question, identify, say, as the commitments that are specified in the code and which commitments will be obligatory on everybody in the organisation from bottom to top, that there will be that environment where they can live out the principles that the code involves. They're not circumstances in which it will be reasonable or realistic to call on Transparency Ireland International or any other organisation. That requires the environment and the confidence and the assurance that anywhere in the country, at any level, somebody can raise a point, make an issue, ask a hard question, be critical, identify what is wrong, call out what is inappropriate. And I just would be interested in your view, Commissioner, on this one, in terms of what it is that you can do to assure, reassure, and create the environment in which that will be possible when all around you, the organisation, will be swirling everything that is negative about the way, through the issues that the tribunal will be investigating on. Everything that is complicated and everything that could tend to discourage how people will, discourage people's willingness to engage in this way.
I think obviously the tribunal issues we will have to leave and deal with the tribunal, but in generalities. So if I give a very specific example, 2 weeks ago, I think today or yesterday, we had a graduation ceremony in the college which Helen attended. And at that graduation ceremony, before the graduation, we have an attestation. And one of the things, so that's literally the people that are going to be the last group, or the first group or last group, whichever way you want to look at it, to go out the door and take up their roles as members of Garda Síochána. And we discussed in that session the code of ethics, we discussed the behaviours and the values and the 9 pillars in real terms, in terms of what their interaction with the community would mean. And by carrying that forward, we do the very same within our own groupings. And both John and Donald and Eugene have spoken about going around the country and meeting people. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is the training programs that we spoke about. And I absolutely agree. We can't outsource that to any agency or any body. That's the environment, that's the culture that we're creating in the organisation. That's the culture since 2014 that we have begun. And, you know, I made the point a long time ago, back in 2014, it's a journey. And probably with never a destination, an ending destination. It's an ongoing process. And it has to be there because John raised a very important point. We're dealing with people. And I actually think that in some ways, sometimes when things are spoken about as they are now in the public domain, that can actually be quite a positive catalyst. And I think you have to use that as a positive catalyst to encourage people, to bring people on and to show the supports that are there for people. And that's why we're putting the structures that we've spoken about internally. That's why we have additional supports, and not just those supports, we have other supports that I won't get into the detail of here, but we've other supports that are available to individual members. Because each individual, and I mentioned this before to the authority, every individual, all of us are different, and all of us have different requirements. So we want to keep flexibility there to make additional supports available to individuals as required, and that they feel that they are supported and that the proper environment is created to do exactly what you're saying. And I know Eugene wanted to come back in at some point.
I just wanted to say that given the particular terms of reference of the tribunal, that we must be extremely cautious in terms of what we can say by way of reference to matters of history, and which may indeed be heard throughout that process. So therefore, perhaps our answers in respect of the specific question you raised and the backdrop that the context in which you set it, have given us certain constraints we must observe in the light of the forthcoming tribunal. That's just the only general point.
I'm looking entirely forward and not, there's a tribunal established to look retrospectively. But part of the future for the next at least 18 months is going to be the reality of the tribunal. We have been very happy to acknowledge the very positive response to the Code of Ethics and the genuine nature of that response from the Garda Síochána and the evident willingness to engage with its principles. I think the question is, in the context of what will happen in and around a tribunal, are there steps that you can take, Commissioner, to encourage members of all hues in the organisation to recognise the principles that are implicit in the code and to reassure people that the organisation is not only open for business, but it's open to the views and the critiques and the observations, and to embrace them, notwithstanding all that's happening in the atmosphere.
Absolutely. And even in our modernisation and renewal programme, you will see we have a chapter supporting our people. So you're quite right, Bob. There will be, and I mentioned the word compartmentalise earlier on, I don't say it lightly. The tribunal and the process of the tribunal has to, as Eugene says, take place in its environment. Meanwhile, we have an organisation of 16,000 people that we have to support, that we have to encourage and we have to motivate, and we have to support, as is our commitment in our modernisation and renewal programme. In doing that, we will be doing, as the top team and right down throughout the organisation with all of our people, making sure that people are aware that that support, nothing changes because the tribunal is going on. In fact, what I mentioned is sometimes this can be a catalyst for positive change. So while that is going on, that people can still be encouraged to speak up, to have the courage of their convictions, to challenge things. And we say that all of the time. It's more than just saying it. It's actually encouraging people to actually, even students in the college. And it's very interesting. And at Gertrude, we were looking at ways that we can actually capture and measure this. But, you know, the anecdotal feedback that we get from the community right around is the difference in the engagement and the level of engagement with the guards. And within station parties, so within our own organisation, as you go around the country, you can actually sense when you go into a station where you're meeting young people, or if it's at an event where you're meeting not just young people, but our people. And you can sense their confidence. You know, the training programme, our foundation training programme in itself, actually encourages that very, so all the way from our training programme, but right through our other training programmes. And that doesn't forget about the people that are already in. So it's not just the new people coming in, our new entrants, it's our members who are there. So actually making sure the code of ethics, John mentioned earlier on the decision-making model. We all use the decision-making model for everything from operational policing all the way through to decision-making, and embedding the code of ethics in that actually make sure that it's there and it's live and it's iterative, if I can put it that way.
If I may as well, just add to that. So we've talked a lot about ethics. We've talked quite a lot about culture as well. We've talked about a lot of processes that we're going to be putting into place. But I'd also want to flag up that obviously we want to look at whether that's had the impact that we wanted it to have. So one of the things that we are, which is actually out to procurement now, is the cultural audit. So the cultural audit will be a very important mechanism by which to actually measure the impact that we're actually having on the organisation as a whole. And one of the things that we do want to pick up on the cultural audit is this whole issue of the culture of disclosure, whether people do actually feel that they're comfortable about coming in to disclose matters. So we will actually also have a monitoring mechanism there, which could also provide an interesting feedback loop, in fact, in terms of actually developing our practice and policy. We're also, obviously, in terms of the culture and ethics, it's the impact on the public as well, and that's where we actually have our public attitude survey. So I think what we're trying to do is to build up our evidence base in order to support the activities, our policies, our practices, and ensure that they actually have the positive outcomes that we want.
Yes, there's, to finish, Chair, from my perspective anyway, I think the cultural audit will be a seriously important baseline from which future evaluations can be undertaken about the kind of cultural change that has been spoken of. I think that the protected disclosures legislation is there. The policy can be reviewed and procedures developed. The more challenging bit, it is the take up thy bed and walk bit. That's in the general speaking up and in the willingness and encouragement for people to be open in all circumstances. That probably is the one that yields the greatest fruit as well when it happens. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Bob. Just to explain my interjection, the review of your protected disclosure policy that we did at the back end of last year made significant recommendations, and you accepted most of them, and not all of them, which is entirely your right. So to that extent, we didn't endorse the new policy because it didn't adopt all of our recommendations. Just to explain my interjection, and just endorsement maybe have been a step too far for us. We recognised in the policy that there would be a journey during this year of internal consultation that would have to take place, and that there would be another iteration. So, as I say, just to explain my interjection, we, as Bob has said, we think the culture audit is particularly tricky, particularly important, and I would like to just underline one of the views we took in that review was that point about the location. And, you know, internal affairs can have a chilling effect. So the location of a positive policy, that's just a concern that we have, that it may send out the incorrect message, which is why we were anxious to see where it would be located in a positive way rather than in a chilling way.
Perhaps I could clarify that again, Chair, and maybe created the impression that it was in internal affairs. I do have responsibility for internal affairs, but I also have responsibility for governance and accountability, and it's in that, under that heading, that it's driven from. So it isn't actually housed in internal affairs, and it's not the intention to do so. And we welcome the support that you've given, the authority has given to the policy, and perhaps we can look forward to ultimate endorsement at some point in the future.
Thank you for that. I'm now going to invite Judith. She wants to take up some issues around training and so on.
Thanks, Chair. I guess I have a question building on some of the areas that Bob covered, and then a question on training and selection and embedding in operations. So if I can start with the leadership piece. From my experience in embedding a code of ethics in a large police organisation, police officers and staff are extremely perceptive, observant people. And the behaviour of people at senior level will very quickly hold below the water any efforts, genuine or otherwise, made by the team to embed the code. So I want to just build on what Bob's been asking you about the tone and the atmosphere that the leadership team creates, and ask you that if there were a fly on the wall of your management meetings and your team meetings every day, would they see the code of ethics lived and breathed in the behaviour of all of the team? And if they wouldn't, how would that be dealt with?
I think at the outset, and John Barrett can confirm, the Code of Ethics is now embedded in all of our promotion courses and in our core training. So every member that has already started from the outset. So every member of the organisation that is being trained, and every member that is going on a promotion course, will get the new latest version of the Code of Ethics. In terms of our, do we live by it every day? We certainly strive to live by it every day. And certainly we hold one another to account as best we can. You know, can that improve? Of course it can. And certainly we're all going to undergo the training within the next couple of weeks to improve how we go about that. It is a journey. It does take time. We certainly strive to live by the Code of Ethics and the principles all the time.
And I think, Judith, if I could extend on that, I think you ask an important question about the fly on the wall. And I think one of the important things about, and why we asked John to start the training with the senior team, I think it actually empowers people to challenge behaviours that may not be, as John says, that may not have achieved, maybe striving to achieve, but may not yet have achieved the positive behaviours. But I think one of the very welcome things is, as we look at the competitions that are going on at the moment for the assistant commissioners and the executive directors, because that's the level we're talking about starting at, I think actually as we see the team actually evolve and develop, it's very opportune then that this training will happen, and that new people coming onto that team can actually help to change some of the perspectives.
It's just a question of relentless reinforcement and being aware of every single thing that you do or say will be interpreted through the lens now of a code of ethics. And that is a good thing. So just pursuing the issue then of selection and training, which you've referred to there, it's the authority's view that the code should underpin selection for recruitment, selection for specialist units, and selection for promotion. So what steps have been taken to embed it in those processes, and what steps do you plan in the future?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that are very tangible and ongoing right now, and it's going to be a work in progress as we go through the various competitions that are already in train. Our intention is that the various core skills that are described in the competency model that we use will reflect language drawn directly from the Code of Ethics. So I guess, Judith, we're in a rewrite process, and I'm conscious that, and I paid compliment to you for delivering on time. Our obligation is to deliver to you a plan by the end of Q1. So I want to make the point that, we are, as we see it right now, working on exactly that, developing a plan. We have gone ahead in some areas where it was possible to do so. We have some rewrites on those particular core skill areas that are described in the competencies, and the language that we are going to adopt in the descriptors of those. And I make no apology for this, we're going to plagiarise the Code of Ethics.
Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, John.
Chairman, it is indeed.
I think I suppose we're of the same view. Sorry, I beg your pardon? We're of the same view as the Commissioner that, current events could be a catalyst. Yes. And we want the Code of Ethics to be central to that catalyst. So if we're pressing you ahead of your schedule, it's with that in mind. Sorry, Judith.
Yeah. Well, just pursuing this then in terms of the breadth and depth of the embedding of the code. It's not just an HR function. Certainly the authority sees it as much broader than that in terms of the leadership of the whole team. And in that regard, it has to be embedded in investigations, in operations, both overt and covert, in planning for public order scenarios, in all of those operational areas, and indeed in finance, HR, procurement, and those other areas where ethical issues may arise. So what plans do you have in particular? I'm thinking in the operational context of investigations and operations themselves, overt or covert. What plans do you have to make the code come to life in those specialisms?
We used the phrase, Judith, earlier in a different context about visible leadership. And I think visible leadership in this space is critically important to show through our behaviours as a senior management team how committed we are to the code of ethics within the organisation. Through our meetings around the country, by making ourselves available to members, by making ourselves accessible to civilian and Garda members in all our interactions, that we use the opportunities to reference and stress the importance of behaviours in that sense. So to pick up where you're going, as a consequence of that, we would envisage that ripple effect will follow. But it starts at this table. It starts with the executive team in being seen to promote and in seen to deliver on our priority to this piece of work.
I could maybe add, Judith, just to that, all of our operational plans and operational policies are currently human rights proofed, and in the future the Code of Ethics will form a part of that. They're all currently human rights proofed. Similarly, we have talked about in the MRP our operating model, and the Code of Ethics will form as part of that. So in every action we take, every decision we make, the Code of Ethics will be central to all of that.
And I think just linking that back in what John said at the outset, you know, I suppose one of the positive things about reflecting on the Code of Ethics is when we looked at our own and mapped it against our own decision-making model, the 9 pillars are there, and the Code of Ethics is at the core of the decision-making model. The decision-making model is at the core of the operating model. So I think that's what gives us the reassurance that it's all there.
Is that now explicit in the decision model, the mention of the Code of Ethics at the centre of the strands, of the spokes of the wheel?
Yeah, there was a segment in the pie chart, effectively, which dealt with the component elements of the decision-making model. That which dealt with ethical behaviour has been now replaced by specific reference.
That's helpful because
Yes.
it embeds it from day one. I was going to ask another question just in relation to the intelligence side then and the more sensitive areas of the code, because it says in the code itself, no area, however sensitive, should be beyond the reach of the code. And I just wondered whether you thought or whether you agreed it would be helpful in showing how the code has no limits to its reach, that there might be multidisciplinary, multi-skilled training where people from both uniform and specialist disciplines might train together and discuss ethical scenarios so that everyone can see that this is something that applies right across and there's no limit to the reach of the code.
I think that's one of the distinct benefits of having a unitary policing and intelligence service is actually we do cross-training all of the time. So all of our operating model is all cross-functional, so there is no distinction.
And would you agree that that might be a way of delivering training then going forward?
That's the way we do our training anyway. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Pat?
Sorry, just thanks, Chair. I just wanted to ask one question. First of all, I'm very encouraged with everything I've heard in relation to the code and the speaking up, but not everybody will have heard what we've heard here today, unless they're listening in or they listen to it afterwards or watched afterwards. So just wondering, have you communicated with the 16,000 people in the Garda Síochána with your very, very strong message of speaking up and protection and so on, things we've heard today? And if you haven't done it at the highest, from you, Commissioner, it'd be well worth, I suggest maybe you should do it.
We do it all the time. So we do it at our meetings, we do it through our portal, and it's a continuous process of communication.
And at our weekly communications meeting, it is a standard item about internal communications, and since these issues have been raised, one of the key issues for us is how are we going to get this message out to all of the organisation, so that for sure we want every member, all 19,000 people in our organisation, we want all of them to hear the message that we've heard today, and it is there is a specific work programme being developed on that, both, at district, at divisional, at regional level, right across the organisation, and that is rolling out as we speak, so that everybody is clear about the message that everyone is hearing.
And will it be in writing?
Absolutely, you can.
Okay.
Do you think when the culture audit is done and the questions are asked, that all members of the Garda Síochána organisation will realise that they were communicated with? I'm very conscious that you can be pushing out stuff, but it doesn't necessarily land. So I think this is what Pat and Maureen earlier were trying to probe, is, what kind of feedback loops have you to ensure that messages land? And I think you understand the question.
I think, as Gertrude said, I can't project what the finding is going to be in the culture audit, or my head of analysis would certainly question my methodology. So no, we can't. But I think what we can do is ensure that we make sure that we make it as visible, as meaningful as possible, and that's the job of the top team. But I think the culture audit is actually going to tell us how successful that is.
Because we're obviously concerned, and you'll have gathered that across the piece this afternoon, not just about public confidence in the Garda Síochána, but confidence within the Garda Síochána to deliver what really needs to be delivered on an ongoing basis, notwithstanding events that may be going on. And I guess, anybody else? Maureen?
Just one quick question and maybe a comment. And if I'm inappropriate, I'm sure you'll let me know, Eugene. But Eugene and the Commissioner and John earlier responded to something about the tribunal by saying you want your side, you welcome it, you want your side of the story to come out and be exposed. I think it's important. Two things. One is be careful not to go into groupthink. The fact is you have a large, complicated force, and there are issues of significant concern. And I think the message, you need to be very aware of the message that sends to your Garda members. They may well know all's not well in the garden. I don't know where, I don't know, but they will know for sure where things aren't well in the garden. And saying that your side of the story, it struck me as a little too certain.
I think Maureen will regard that as a comment rather than a question. I think Eugene would agree with me. It's getting a little bit close.
Could I clarify something? Because I think Maureen raised a very important point. Maureen, the answer I gave was not in relation to the tribunal. It was actually in relation to the question about communications and the media.
Yeah.
And I was saying that one of the aspects of the frustrations of our people is the inaccuracy of some of the stories that are in the public domain. I'm not speaking, and I want to make that very clear, about issues of the tribunal, because I absolutely agree it is not, the tribunal will deal with facts, not sides. And I think that's important. But separately, my answer to your question was in relation to the media and communications generally. And sometimes some of the frustrations of our people, and what they're onto us all the time about doing, is we want that corrected or we want that corrected. That's factually inaccurate. We have to make decisions whether or not we're going to absolutely torment ourselves and indeed torment different media outlets in terms of looking for corrections to factual inaccuracies, or whether we say that so they're decisions that we have to make all of the time. So I wouldn't like to give the impression that anything I said had anything to do with any of the issues. As I say, the tribunal will happen in a different space and will deal with facts that are presented to it. But these are issues in relation to ongoing communications issues as opposed to others.
That's fine, Commissioner. My last point, though, in regard to this is that I would think, as someone who's been involved in organizations for a long time, that you will really have to attend to communications in that time period for people to have issues of morale, issues of, there'll be loads of questions, most of which you won't be able to answer. So again, a concern of ours is the impact on the serving Garda members in this difficult period of time, that they are motivated, that they are communicated with, led, in circumstances where there will be tremendous distractions.
Take that as a comment as well. Thank you, Maureen. I know Bob has a quick point, and then I want to move on to something else finally.
I'd betray 40 years of my life if I didn't say that, if I didn't attest to the importance of a mature, open and comprehensive engagement with the media, which is a crucial element in enhancing the citizens' understanding of the society in which they live, and in this context of the role of policing, and specifically the Garda Síochána in that context. The point I wanted to make was, and thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to do so very briefly, the statute imposes a very particular requirement on the Commissioner in relation to the Code of Ethics to take steps to ensure that every member has read and understood it, and to record those measures. Yes. I wonder, have you determined what form those steps will take at this stage? And secondly, whether it presents an opportunity in engaging with every member to underline the importance of the openness issues that we have been talking about?
Yes is the answer to that, and I think it's critical that there is a very real record of people not just getting a copy, but having gone through it, answered questions on it, and being in a position to say that I know and understand its contents. We're looking to develop a digital platform, essentially, which is going to give everybody a walk through the 9 pillars, and there'll be a Q&A, if you're in effect, on each of those 9 pillars with some ethical dilemmas. We're working, one of the potential people that we're working with is an external vendor who does this as a core competence, with a view to setting this up so that it's going to be sustained. And if I can identify something that Pat put to me at the very beginning of our dialogue, and I think Maureen, you've just emphasised, and Bob likewise, this has to be sustained over time. And as the Commissioner said, this isn't, a whitewash brush effect and we're done. The organisation is mutating and changing and growing. We are going to grow to 21,000 people over the next 59 months. So we have 7,500 people to hire in that window. Each of them coming in will be introduced right away to the Code of Ethics. But that group that are going to remain with us, who we want, as John said, to walk the talk, they are going to have a digital footprint of having received, having gone through the training, and having answered questions as to what it means. So therefore, like never before, we'll be able to demonstrate that those within the organisation have a record of having been taken through the programme on the Code of Ethics.
Chair, could I make a general point, just maybe sweeping up on something that Maureen and Bob, because I think it's very important. As part of the Strategic Communications Plan, actually we have a Communications Advisory Council, because I think Bob makes a very important point. The media and the public domain are a very important part of what it is that we have to do, and especially contributing to the legitimacy of the organisation, the transparency and the openness. So part of that communications plan that Andrew is leading out on, there is a Communications Advisory Council, and we again very much welcome any input from authority members into that. Feel free. We're always looking for new and good ideas, and I'll give that to the media as well. We're very happy to take any inputs whatsoever.
Okay, thank you for that. And before we just close on the Code of Ethics, can I just also draw maybe the audience's attention, because I know you know this, to the fact that this is also a code that's available, of course, to the public. And part of the embedding of the code in your work will be the extent to which the public expect to see those behaviours lived. And I guess in a way that will be the real test of the embedding, is when the public can have this in their hand and say, actually, this is the kind of behaviour I have observed in my engagement with the Garda Síochána. So I will, and the authority will be taking steps over the course of the year to do some embedding outside of the Gardaí while you're doing the embedding inside the Gardaí. We have a final matter we just want to raise under other business. Maureen Ryan is going to raise it with you.
Thanks, Chair. Just briefly going to address that vexed issue of Garda statistics. And if you remember, last year we met in committee stage and had an extensive briefing on the issue of statistics, particularly against the backdrop of the reservations that have been articulated by the Central Statistics Office in relation to the reliability of statistics. And at that stage too, you identified the various initiatives that you were putting in place to ensure that those statistics were going to be of a level that the public and ourselves and yourselves could rely on. And that we also discussed the importance of accurate and reliable statistics in the context of deployment of resources, in terms of the issue, as the Irish Times spoke about, the credibility of the organisation and so on, and critical in terms of many walks of life. So authority members were extremely troubled to read of the Medical Bureau of Road Safety referring to the number of breathalyzer tests being recorded by Garda and Pulse exceeding the number of breathalyzer kits being supplied to them. So I would like you, Commissioner, if you might make some observations in relation to that particular instance. And also I'd be interested in some observations in relation to your current confidence in relation to the statistics that are available, that are made available on an ongoing basis.
Okay. In relation to the Medical Bureau of Road Safety, I might get Deputy Commissioner Toomey, who's in the process of writing to you on that, maybe just to address that.
An issue arose in relation to this, and revised procedures were brought in to ensure the accuracy of the data, and they were brought in early 2016. I suppose the accuracy of our data is of concern to Garda Síochána, and the issue has been raised, as we're all well aware of the history of it. A number of changes to our practices have been brought into place, and we are certainly, while we can't say that it's 100% right, we can say it has improved over time, and similarly in this particular area, it has improved. I mentioned.
Can I come back to this particular instance, which, as I mentioned at the outset, we found troubling, because you had what was reported was the number of tests recorded on Pulse, and they exceeding the number of kits. So clearly there's a discrepancy, and obviously the concern of the authority is the extent to which this might be reflected not just in this area but more widely. Have you gotten to the bottom of this particular issue? Can you assure the authority that it was confined to a particular area or areas? Was there a particular reason that you can give that we feel is credible, and that then we can look at the overall issue of statistics?
The audit and the final report will be completed in the next 2 months. What I can say is that the current policy and practice that is in place certainly addresses any of the issues that have been identified and any of the weaknesses. So certainly since early 2016, we are confident that the new processes that are in place have addressed any weaknesses in the previous system. I think we have to wait the final report before we can speak definitively on the issues. But a number of actions have been taken in this particular area, and as I addressed earlier on, there are other proposals, to improve that even further. With the
give us some idea of the actions, because it's always the danger if a report, if it's 2 months after it got some public airing, that it's the level of importance or the level of concern that we would have certainly been diminished considerably.
Well, the specific issues and the specific actions that we have taken, in terms of that there is a unit that we use. The Draeger is the unit that we use, so we take the numbers from that. So we specifically take the numbers from the actual unit itself. So they're written down so that we can ensure from another perspective. These are spread all over the country. They're in every station all over the country. But so in the last 12 months, we have a specific audit trail, so number by number, and we ensure they follow on. Now, you can imagine, we have a couple of hundred Garda stations, and we have these units spread all over it. And they're out on the side of the road tonight, and then they're back in, and somebody else has them tomorrow. So it is difficult, it is complex. These are breath tests, and they're not prosecutions. We had done some earlier work in terms of the checkpoints and the mandatory alcohol checkpoints, and we're satisfied that information is accurate. They're authorised in law, and we're happy that is accurate. But again, like any policy that we have in place, we're continually looking to improve it, and as our IT system improves, it will enable us to put more robust processes in place to ensure the accuracy. Again, these are legacy issues going back over a number of years, and again, the disparate nature of the organisation can make it at times quite cumbersome to ensure the accuracy of it. But we're certainly happy that the practice that's in place now ensures the accuracy.
You can see our concern here, because which is quite clearly that if this has a solid basis, if it's factual, the concern is in relation to statistics that are gathered on Pulse in a sort of broader range of areas, broader range of crime areas. And I know Gertjan has been doing considerable work on that. But to what extent now can you offer assurance both to the authority and to the public that the records that are going on Pulse now accurately reflect the activity of the Garda?
Well, we've made a number of changes with Pulse. We have introduced Pulse 6.8, we've introduced Pulse 6.9, which have made incremental changes across the crime area and now across the traffic area. So there has been continuous improvement brought into this area since 2014. I think late 2014, there have been incremental changes. So we are continuing to improve the process, and I'm certainly happy and comfortable that at this present time and moment there are new governance structures in place where people now provide the oversight around them. I think John O'Driscoll touched on how we're now putting in units at the centre to monitor these actions and these the statistics on a daily basis. So it is a new area for us, and it is an area that we're improving. We've improved the IT piece, we've improved the structures at the centre, we've given people specific roles and responsibility for ensuring the accuracy of our data. We'll be putting in additional people into the information centre in Castlebar, and that'll bring in additional strength and additional governance around the whole area. And this is following on from the recommendations of the inspectors who we have worked with, and they have had some visibility over this. Maybe Gertjan wants to maybe talk some.
Well, no, I think I would just make a more general point that, we've started a discussion about kind of maybe standing back a wee bit, because we talk about statistics and data quality. I mean, we collect information for a purpose. We collect information for the purposes of preventing crime and detecting crime. So when we want to have a look at our information, we just have to make sure that at those various stages, we get the right dimensions of data quality on that. And that actually we can almost knit it back into the organisation. We've talked a lot about ethics, we've talked a lot about culture. The reasons why we're collecting information on burglaries is to actually identify our burglary hotspots so we can actually target them, so we can ensure that the communities are safe, So we just want to try and begin to actually stand back a wee bit more and actually have a look at that kind of broader conversation. So statistics aren't something out there. They're not something that we provide the CSO and they subsequently publish. This is information that should be the lifeblood of the organisation in order to support the day-to-day activity that we want to do.
That's so I think it's so important, the accuracy and the reliability.
That's it.
And if we have a situation in which those statistics are called into question in terms of reliability, it emphasises the importance. I don't wish to pursue it, Chair, but what I would ask, if the report is going to be ready in 2 months' time, that it would be back for further discussion.
Certainly we can do that. I think I'd like to underline the point that Gertjan made. We've just spent a while talking about embedding codes of ethics. Well, arguably, when there are big discrepancies in statistics, as you say, it's not a boring, dusty subject for the shelf. It's either inflated or carelessness. And when it's not marginal. It's marginal, you can certainly understand, and particularly as John Toomey made the point, this is not prosecution, but it's hugely important management information. And it's hugely important feeder into the hotspot analysis. And so we're focusing on it because, and we've focused on it at previous meetings, it's the behaviours that might cause people to feel it was appropriate to inflate the data. And that's, I think, is at the heart of our concern. And I suppose we have already, as some of you know, had a conversation in the policing committee about these issues, and we were a bit disappointed that we weren't made aware of the audit as part of that conversation. And just while we're on the question of roads policing, it's an opportunity for me to again remind our audience that our next public meeting, which will be in April, we've already, and we've advised you of this, we've already decided it will focus primarily on roads policing, and we will have a range of inputs in advance of that meeting, including from the Road Safety Authority and so on, because this is a very significant area of performance, of focus of Garda performance in terms of community confidence and also in terms of the policing plan. So the statistical piece feeds into real stuff, and I think I agree with Gertrude in that regard. Does anybody on my side have any other point to raise? Are we adjourned, Commissioner?
No, perfect.
We're adjourned?
Yep.
Thank you very much indeed.